It's Sunday, May 4, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is a staff writer at The Atlantic and author of The Project, How Project 2025 is Remaking America. David A. Graham, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
David, maybe we should start just by going back and explaining to people what Project 2025 is, because whilst there was a lot of attention and heat on it leading up to the election, I do feel that the use of Project 2025 language has kind of been dropped by the media. So if you were to describe not all 900 pages of it, but if you were just to, as you did when you were writing your book, how would you describe it for those who are coming across it for the first time?
So Project 2025 was basically an attempt to set the agenda for the second Trump administration. Put together, convened by the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank, and put together by many alums of the first Trump administration. And it had three prongs, one of which was this 900-page document laying out some policies and some methods for doing them. Another one was a training program for potential appointees. And then the third one was a 100-day playbook of executive orders and the like. And I would say in the big document, it is a list of policies, but the thing that I think is maybe underappreciated is how much it's also a series of methods, a whole protocol for how to take over the executive branch and how to make the things they want happen.
And it, in its simplest form, is shifting America to the far right, from doing away with this tradition of neoliberalism where you just assume that normal is for people to be able to kind of live their lives freely, however they want, speak freely, and even to the extent that Roe versus Wade and the reversal of that was almost kind of the lead up to Project 2025, because so much of the kind of anti-abortion movement is baked into that document, isn't it?
I think it's very much the heart of it. There's a lot of places where there are disagreements, more than I think I anticipated before I read the whole thing, and you can see some seams in the conservative movement. But I think abortion and its connection to a kind of conservative vision of the family, very traditional gender norms, writing trans people literally out of the existence of the language of the government. All of those things are close together, and that's the thing that maybe unites the writers most of all.
Because that's been a plan for an awfully long time, hasn't it? And even when Roe kind of first happened in 1973, that almost encouraged this group to be like, okay, we got to deal with this. It's taken them 50 odd years, but this is, as we speak right now, this is what they've been planning all along. And to use The Handmaid's Tale as an example, which I think was written in 1983, I mean, there is so much parity, and every day is more frightening than the next.
Yeah, and I think there's this socially conservative vision that relates to a lot of things we've seen from people on the right for a long time. Obviously, abortion is a long-term priority, but there's really a turn away from the libertarian strain of conservatism in this. And I've been trying to talk about it not always successfully, but I've been trying to think about it more as right-wing than as conservative. Because it isn't conservative. I think it's radical in a lot of ways. And they want to use the coercive power of the government to get these things done, in a way that, past conservatives may have wanted to do them, but they may be blanched a little bit before this kind of, presidential power. There's no shyness about this here. They're ready to go all in on it.
Trump denied knowing anything about it, didn't he? I mean,
he did.
in the lead up to the election, my favorite line of his was, "I don't know anything about it. I haven't read it, but there's some quite good stuff in there." and only that contradiction can happen out of the mouth of somebody such as him. He was lying, obviously. He probably didn't read it because he doesn't read.
I believe that, yeah.
But that's not the point, though, is it? Because we look at the people that he's employed in his cabinet, and we certainly look at the policies. And if you look at his first week in office, 53 executive orders signed in the first week, 36 of those literally mirrored proposals within the Heritage Foundation's brief of Project 2025. Not to mention the personnel. There is no arguing that this is the mandate for leadership.
Yeah, I mean, something like a quarter of the contributors had been in the first Trump administration. A bunch of them are back in the second Trump administration. I think about somebody like Russell Vought, who was the head of Office and Management and Budget in the first term. He was the intellectual architect of Project 2025 in between. At the same time, he was the policy director for the Republican National Convention. So even as he's working on Project 2025, he's writing Trump's platform. And then now he's back in the administration once again as head of OMB. So it is really a seamless relationship in a lot of places. Although they do have differences with Trump. But I think the idea that there was any distinction was never remotely true.
It's important that we reference people like Russell Vought, because, you know, he's not really a frontline operator, is he? And, you know, directing the Office of Management and Budget is not a sexy title necessarily. So he is hidden, but the danger of these people being hidden is that they can actually be far more dangerous when they are not being scrutinized by the public. And he wrote a chapter outlining plans to overhaul the executive branch, refocus federal agencies to serve the president's agenda. I mean, is dangerous the right word to describe that individual?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's so important about him is that he knows government really well. You know, Trump often shows he has no idea what he's doing. Elon Musk has managed to do a lot of damage, but also has just obvious ignorance of government. Russell Vought isn't like that. You know, he spent so much of his career, in Congress working for very fiscally conservative Republicans, then at the Heritage Foundation back and forth and in some places. And he knows really well how it works. And he's thought a lot about it. And I think that's one reason they've been able to do so much in the first 100 days is his knowledge of it. And he speaks, I mean, it's really bizarre. He looks like a sort of budget wonk. He's, shaved head and neatly trimmed beard. And he speaks in this kind of low tone of voice. But the things he says are really wild. The thing that sticks out most is he says, we want to put the bureaucrats in trauma. We want them to be traumatized. I think that gives a sense of what where he's coming from, both in terms of substance and the kind of attitude he brings to it.
They should come to work every day in fear.
That's right.
I heard a similar quote from Jeff Bezos recently. I mean, this is the worry, isn't it? That there is a movement and the oligarchs and these, super rich, as well as these MAGA Republicans and far-right Christian nationalists. I'm not using the word conservative, as you quite rightly say. It's kind of null and void these days. But there are an awful lot of people, and Trump did get 77 million votes, give or take, that are buying into all of this stuff. They actually think this is all rather brilliant. And yet for those of us who live in modernity and have traveled and see the world as a truly free kind of liberal democracies and social democracies, for us it's abhorrent. But this is a problem, isn't it? Because, what is normal in America?
I think a lot of people who supported Trump are going to have some hesitations when they start to see what this looks like. He distanced himself from it, and it was, to me, always really transparently false. But it's interesting. There was a great poll from October of 2024, and when it showed, they asked people about a bunch of policies from Project 2025, and they hated them. I mean, there was widespread disapproval, but they also just didn't believe that Trump would do them. And now, of course, he's doing that. And I think the vision that they lay out is not just, there's a kind of inchoate, they're taking the country from us. We need to go back to the way things were sort of attitude. And it's all well and good to say that in an emotional way. But when you start to put that into policy, I think it's different. And, it's a range of things. They talk about liberty being the liberty not to do as we can, but as we should, which sounds quite coercive to me. They talk about, banning pornography. They talk about forcing people into certain family structures. And I find it hard to believe that that's going to be as popular once it's in place as it was when Trump was distancing himself from it.
I suppose I'm overly cautious because, I've failed to correctly predict Brexit when I was living in the UK and with Europe, and I was so convinced no one's going to go for that. I also thought that Kamala Harris would easily win this last election. So my naivete is very much on show. Is there a fear that we are putting too much trust into the American people, that, he'll never do that? Because remember, we're only 100 odd days into the Trump administration, and already, I mean, if it carries on at this rate for 4 years, I mean, this is going to change the face of America on the world stage, but domestically for people for a generation or more.
I think that's right. And I think even if they slow down, it will already have done that. So it's impossible to think about this in a simply reactive sense or to talk about how we're going to put things back. I mean, this is a plan that wants to move fast and break the federal government because they understand that there could be a backlash. And they say, they write, we have to get as much done in the first 100 days as we can. We have 2 years to move before the midterms. And so they're planning to simply change the stakes, change the terms of engagement so that the next president is going to inherit a government that's so different. And I think we're already seeing that effect on individuals' lives. When people can't get their Social Security appointments, when people's spouses are getting swept up, when American citizens are being arrested and deported to other countries, we can already see the effects of these sorts of things. So there's no going back. It's a question of what we can build for the future. But the damage, I think, will be permanent.
You describe it as a plan for basically 100 years for America. And you talk about, I really enjoy your analogy of a skeleton key. This is like a skeleton key blueprint for this movement. Just talk to that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does two things. One, it tells us how this administration will proceed. And so, it feels very chaotic when we're watching the news. And I think there is a lot of chaos in some places. But I also think it's important to recognize and to see where there's a plan under this. And how many of these things, even when they're done haphazardly, are in service of this plan. I also think it's important to think about Trump as a vessel, as much as anything for them. I mean, these people are loyal to Trump. They have worked for him. They love him and they adore him. But they're also looking to a future beyond him. So he's the president who can get done what they need to do. He's the one who has the kind of fealty in Congress to ram these things through without someone reacting. But he also is not, he's not a true social conservative in the way they are. He obviously doesn't represent the same kind of traditional family. But they see him as a way to get what they want started. And then they want to look beyond that to how they can change the federal government and change American society. On this very long scale, up to a century. They talk about the New Deal. They say the New Deal is a negative turning point in American history when the government took on a larger role, and you have these executive departments that they control a lot, and they want to go back beyond that.
So let's talk about the differences between Trump's agenda and the Project 2025 mandate for leadership, because they converge, but there are fundamental differences, right? And you kind of said this, that he is not what they are. He is a populist. He will change his position depending on which audience he's performing to. And I mean that literally. I mean, he does. I remember him saying recently, referring to various rallies that he'd held before the election. And in an interview, he referred to them as, we did a show here and we did a show there. And I was like, wow, like this guy really just sees this as a kind of P.T. Barnum circus tent event. But let's just talk about these differences, because I see Trump as, it's all about him, obviously, and Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico. That's kind of his section. But talk to me about the more extreme section that he is kind of being used to implement.
I think this socially very traditional vision is their big thing. It's so important to them. It's what motivates a lot of them and brings them into politics. And it's something that Trump has only vaguely bought into. We saw Trump talk about abortion in his first term, and we saw him appoint justices who would overturn Roe. His own history, he's been back and forth on abortion. There's not a lot to suggest that he's really particularly sincere about that. It's very much a political lever. Like you say, it's populism. He saw that he could get a lot of Republicans behind him by talking about that. And then when he saw that the political juice out of that had been squeezed, he backed away from it. So, during the campaign, he's saying, well, abortion should be a matter for the states. That's certainly not their attitude. Their attitude is that abortion should be banned nationally. If it can't be banned, we should use the FDA to revoke approval for medical abortion drugs. We should use the 1873 Comstock Act to prevent people from mailing abortion drugs through the mail. And they want to create, also, they would like to create a database to surveil abortion. They want to know who's having abortions, where they are. They want to track women who are crossing state lines to have abortions, which is something we've seen a little bit at the state level, but certainly not at the federal level. So it's really all encompassing. And then, that goes on. They would like to, have this vision of men working and women at home. They want lots of children. They want a biblically based education about family through welfare and through other means. They want religious schools and want to basically eliminate public schools and replace them with a more religious system, whether that's vouchers or simply religious public schools. It's this overarching vision. And I think the place where they come together is on trans rights. Because Trump has realized, again, populism, that trans rights is a really effective wedge issue for him. We obviously remember the Trump is for you, Kamala is for they, them ad in the election. And he knows how that works. You can see him learning how that works. And they understand that that's a little bit more conflicted territory than, say, same-sex marriage, which is very popular. And so for them, it's where they jump in. They get people going on that. And from there, they hope to unravel so much of what exists. The protections for gay people, lots of trans protections, the way the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission works, the way the DOJ Civil Rights Division works, the way we enforce Title IX. All of these things are connected once you start with something like trans rights.
There are some things that Trump and the project disagree on, though. Maybe we should start with free trade. I mean, that's quite a big one, isn't it? So how do they work together, considering that Trump is so tariff-based and they are so free trade-based?
I think this is one of these places where you can see how Trump's takeover of the Republican Party has moved a long way, but it hasn't gotten all the way. They're willing to accommodate on a lot of things. They're willing to go along with him. But one place that they haven't given up is on trade. So rather than come to a single position, Project 2025 has two dueling chapters, one from Peter Navarro, who people probably know as one of Trump's advisors now, arguing for tariffs, and another from a traditional sort of free trade conservative think tank saying that tariffs are a bad idea. And they know that they can't come down against tariffs entirely, because that's one of Trump's signature proposals, but they can't bring themselves to support it entirely either. So they have that. You see it also on foreign policy a lot. So Trump has, basically closed the U.S. Agency for International Development. They argue that it ought to be turned into more of a political tool. They don't want to be so squishy, touchy-feely humanitarian, but they do want to use it for American foreign policy. Trump and Musk have just abolished it. They also are more confrontational about Russia. They see Russia as a threat rather than as a friend, the way Trump does. Those are probably the biggest places where I see differences that stick out.
Is the issue with USAID that Trump and Musk just didn't really know what it was? And they saw the word aid and they were like, we don't want to give aid to anybody. And they just kind of shut it down because, any kind of legitimate closure of a department of that size, it would take 5 years to shut it down.
I think that's part of it. And I also think there's a really cynical political calculation going on there. So whereas the people writing about foreign policy for Project 2025 have a broader, longer ideological goal, the people who are running the administration are trying to win votes. And they understand that people think that the U.S. spends much more on foreign aid than it does. And they understand it's very unpopular. And so it's an easy place to demagogue. There's a reason they started with U.S. aid, which is not all that popular, rather than things that are popular. They want to start the erosion somewhere and then start burrowing into the government, and then they can cut other things later.
We should remind people that USAID costs 0.63% of the federal budget, and it's more about influence than anything else, isn't it? I mean, this is the soft power that right. Trump doesn't really understand.
Exactly. This is how you win friends. And if you want to say confront China, which Trump says he does, and which the authors of Project 2025 say, you want to have allies for that. And a good way to do that is to build soft power. But, there are polls. People think that we spend 15 or 20% of the federal budget every year on foreign aid. It's just wildly out of proportion to what reality is.
It's so interesting, the difference between the reality and the fantasy, the propaganda and the truth. And this is this is really the problem, isn't it? This is how we got into this place in the first place. Is that if you exist and you're in that information silo of Fox News and Truth Social and that kind of Musk algorithm, then you are going to lead a completely different life and view of the world than for those of us that live in reality. My fear is that we're getting closer to an argument that both places are legitimate, and whereas one previously was seen as extreme and fringe, it is now moving into the center. Does that worry you too? That the normalization of these extremes?
Oh, absolutely. I think the idea that these have become equivalent is a great way to describe it. And, people talk about mass media, but of course the most popular single media outlet is Fox News. And what they're peddling on Fox News is often disconnected from reality. But people treat it as though it is serious and though it is credible.
And the propaganda continues even though he's won the election. I mean, it wasn't just part of the process to kind of get him elected. But this week on Monday, we saw the regime put posters outside the White House of all the mugshots, effectively, of what they claim are illegal immigrants who have been deported, with the word deported and their name. The most disgusting display of authoritarianism. I think even Kim Jong probably winced when he saw that.
Well, and it's also a situation where they can't actually execute. They had these grand plans for deportation. And what they're finding is it's a lot harder to do that than they thought. Because in fact, people are deeply embedded communities, and there aren't nearly as many undocumented immigrants as Trump has claimed. So when they try to actually deport these people, they can't do it. So instead of that, they're making big claims. So it's all about the rhetoric, which isn't to say that what they're doing is not appalling. I mean, we're following these stories of people in these horrible conditions in El Salvador. We're seeing stories of children who are U.S. citizens being deported. So there are heinous things going on, but they just can't execute the heinous things on the scale they want. So instead, they have to create a propaganda system around it.
Kristi Noem in her military fatigues,
Right.
And cosplay, some people are calling it, standing in front of this El Salvadorian gulag with these men with their heads shaved. I mean, that was a really shocking visual, but that's on purpose, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to what my friend and colleague Adam Serwer wrote in the first Trump administration, which is that the cruelty is the point. And these things show that so much. They enjoy the cruelty, and they think it's important, and I think they're right. It's important to show to some voters that they're being cruel, to show that they're serious, and to give some results.
This is America. This is how I think of it, especially as an immigrant. Does this just go back to the Wild West? I mean, is this just the cowboys versus the Native Americans? I mean, is this really as simple as that they're kind of gun wielding and dressed in their costumes and basically having a whole lot of fun whilst rounding people up?
I think there's certainly an element of that. I mean, you look at the kind of nativism that courses through both Trump's rhetoric or Project 2025. And it's an attempt not just to push out undocumented immigrants, but they want to cut down on legal immigration too. They want to denaturalize people if they can. They want to make it harder to get a visa, reduce the number of visas that are available. So there is this very inward looking sense. But the thing I always think about when I think about the Old West is that there were laws about guns. You couldn't bring your guns into town. You couldn't bring your guns into bars. And now the effort is to make it so you can bring a gun anywhere and you can carry it openly. And you can do anything what you want with it. So we're really in a more lawless situation than the folks were at the OK Corral.
There was always a sheriff in town. These days, it seems like a lot of the sheriffs are very much on the side of the Trump movement. Is that fair to say that law enforcement, a lot of them are kind of behind this shift?
Yeah, that's very much true. And when they aren't, there's an effort to crack down on them. So, they see, for example, the assistance that the Justice Department gives to police departments and sheriff's offices as a tool. They want to crack down and say, if you're not going to cooperate with ICE, as many local sheriffs in blue cities and blue counties have done, we're going to withdraw your funding. We're going to prosecute you potentially. We're going to use the Justice Department to go after you. We've already seen the arrest of a judge allegedly for helping an undocumented immigrant, and the facts of that are pretty vague. And it's hard to imagine that there's a crime committed, even if some of the facts they allege are true. But they want to make sure that if anybody tries to stick to the law or keep an independent system, they will be bullied by the federal government.
Whenever we've had similar conversations, the tense has always been future, but what we're describing now is very much present.
That's true.
You're describing Hannah Dugan, of course, who has apparently spent a lifetime doing the right thing and being in support of people who are mistreated. And I'm of the opinion, maybe because I'm a soft snowflake, but I I believe that the judiciary should be coming down on the side of kindness where possible in these types of situations. And that now will be ancient history, won't it? I mean, there is a level of authoritarianism that they expect from the judiciary as well as what's coming out of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, the effort to bully judges at every level is I think, unprecedented. We've seen, obviously, members of the Trump administration saying that they shouldn't have to follow these rules, attacking judges by name, making the judge the focus. But so many of these judges are simply enforcing the law. So we need to think about it less as an attack on judges than as an attack on the law itself.
Which means that we are a lawless society.
We're certainly on that precipice.
So, but it's one set of laws for the white people and for the wealthy, and it's another set of laws for the immigrants, the people of color, the minority groups. I mean, it is as simple as that. And that is ultimately, because we haven't mentioned the phrase white supremacy yet, and I'm sure we'll come to that, but that is very much at the heart of pretty much everything that we're discussing.
That's right. And I mean, I think the thing that I always want to remind people is that, it may be about those people now, but once the government has realized or has decided that it doesn't have to follow the law, it doesn't have to follow the law for you either. So they may be coming for those folks first, but they're going to start coming for dissenters. They're going to come for people who may look like them, but who disagree. So it's not just a slippery slope. I mean, it's exactly what it is. It's a binary switch. Either there's rule of law or there isn't.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk more about immigration and the Project 2025 approach to rebalancing society. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Do you ever think about how much of your life you actually spend sleeping? It's about a third. That's a lot of time to be laying on something that could be full of toxins or worse, heating you up at night. That's why I switched to an avocado mattress. They're made with certified organic latex, wool and cotton, no chemicals, no weird off-gassing, just clean, cool, naturally breathable comfort. And honestly, it feels like luxury without the guilt. My personal favorite, the Avocado Green Mattress. It's their bestseller for a reason. Super comfy, supportive, and I wake up actually feeling rested. Plus, I know it's sustainably made, ethically sourced, and built to last. Avocado is mission-driven sustainability at its best. Better for you, better for the planet. And right now, you can shop at avocadomattress.com and save up to 10% on certified organic mattresses. Dream of better with Avocado. If you've ever searched your own name or address in Google, it's shocking to find how many results have your personal information. And it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial information, income, and hundreds of other records. They sell and share it publicly without your consent. But Incogni is here to put an end to that. It hunts down these unethical sites and gets your information removed from the places that expose your private data. You don't have to email anyone, fill out any forms, or jump through hoops. They handle the entire process for you. Incogni is also continuously monitoring to see if your data is put back onto these databases, requesting repeated removals. This way, keeping them off forever, so you get way less spam calls, spam emails, and get more peace of mind. And best of all, you can cancel any time, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get it completely risk-free. Right now, you can get 60% off an annual plan by going to incogni.com and use code WEEKEND. That's incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. We're back on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis, and we're joined by our guest from The Atlantic and author of The Project, David A. Graham. David, the deportations, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it has become visceral for so many people who feel compromised. And there's an awful lot of, you mentioned naturalized citizens, but there's an awful lot of green card holders. There's an awful lot of students with student visas. There are people who feel unsafe in the land of the free. The former land of the free. Trump actually did do a reversal because of the federal court ruling on student visas last week. But it's likely that will be temporary. I mean, his plan was to kind of blanket email everybody, and in some cases not email people, and say, okay, that student visa now is revoked. That is terrifying, considering that education is very much at the heart of growing society and just learning how to learn and how to communicate, and they obviously are trying to eradicate that. So with regard to the deportations, they're not being shy about their extreme views on segregation, but the courts are having some success. Do you think that is something that will continue, or is he going to ultimately, by nature of the fact that he has manipulated the courts and packed the courts, that he could actually kind of win the day on this?
Well, I would say just first, when you think about those sorts of moves, they're targeted at people who are not white. They're then also targeted anyone who's a dissenter. So they're searching for people's op-eds, searching for things that people have posted, and using that to target them. So
Rameza Ozturk, Mahmoud Khalil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they're also targeting education, which is a sort of independent redoubt against the kinds of things that they stand for. So it's dangerous in those three ways. We've seen them attacking the judiciary. In Project 2025, it's interesting. They don't discuss the judiciary so much. And what they have instead is a faith that if they can get a lot of these test cases to the Supreme Court, they will win there. So anything that happens below the Supreme Court is really just a preliminary. And they believe that the Supreme Court is sufficiently conservative that when they get these test cases there, they're going to get precedents overruled. They're going to win these cases. And so you can imagine that applying to birthright citizenship, for example, which we know they're going to hear. You can imagine that applying to any number of questions of rule of law. They didn't win on the Alien Enemies Act. They've had some defeats at the Supreme Court, but all of these are preliminary, and they're going to keep trying and keep hoping that they can get the court to go with them.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court then, because arguably some members are quite baked into Project 2025 conceptually, aren't they? And we know that Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, has her connections. She's, alleged insurrectionist herself, and with a whole fascinating kind of cult member history. What is your take on who in that high court are going to be doing Trump's bidding going forward? Because there has been a little dissent recently. Amy Coney Barrett, for example, has kind of been on the fence and voted with the liberal justices a couple of times. You're right, in as much as he feels, partly because of his blanket immunity that they gave him, but also because he knows that he's safe as long as it goes to the Supreme Court. Hence why he pointed at John Roberts in that way. I got you, you got me.
Yeah, well, we've seen that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito seem willing to countenance basically anything that Trump will put in front of them. So that's 2 votes right there. Gorsuch seems to be maybe not quite as far down that line, but certainly tending that direction. They're the 3 liberal justices, and that does leave Barrett and Roberts as the ones who are the ones to watch. It's interesting. The Supreme Court that we have today is so much a product of the Federalist Society and work by Leonard Leo to get things there. But for Project 2025, those folks are a little bit squishy. So a lot of us may feel that the Federalist Society is a really aggressive and powerful conservative force. But Russell Vought said in an interview, I believe in 2024, the Federalist Society doesn't know what time it is. They're too wimpy. They're too they're willing to follow these sort of old legal precepts. We need to find lawyers who are willing to be more creative and who aren't going to be bound by the same old rules. So for them, this court is just too moderate, but they still hope that they can kind of bully it into following their will.
It's amazing, isn't it, to say that the court is too moderate?
It's amazing to think of the Federalist Society as squishes.
This is true. Let's explain to people about these kind of, because the Federalist Society paints itself in interesting ways. It's like a bit of a Trojan horse, isn't it? It gets itself into all of these kind of universities. It kind of gets into young lawyers. Young lawyers connect with it, and it tries to guide them. But it's actually kind of guiding them towards this kind of far right movement. And then the Heritage Foundation comes in and does its bit from the other end. That's how I see it, that these kind of two lobby groups are effectively trying to brainwash people from opposite ends. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's their goal. The goal is to start them young. And I should say that Paul Dans, who was sort of the organizer for Project 2025, joined the Federalist Society. Yes, right. Joined the Project Federalist Society in law school and has been a member for a very long time. So you can see that lineage. And there's a whole constellation of groups, When the organization of this project was intended to be a sort of broad tent. They wanted to get everyone who was in the MAGA movement, even people who were maybe MAGA curious or not MAGA hostile, in so they could get as much influence as they could and get a lot of voices together, get people on the same page and sort of coordinate them.
And when you look at the names that are attributed and the references in the document, there's no shortage of not just current cabinet members. I mean, Tom Homan is referenced in the book, for example, who's the border czar, who is a bruiser, to say the very least, and you can definitely see which side of the aisle he sits. But there was 50 or 60 advocacy groups listed, referenced. So are you saying that by bringing together this very kind of broad group of right-wing thinkers, that it kind of legitimizes the movement?
Yeah, I think it both gives Heritage power. They wanted to be the convener that could do all of this, but they also wanted to try to get as many people together so that it wouldn't look like just one small effort. It wouldn't look like a little part of the MAGA coalition. And then once everybody's on the same page, you're going to be much more effective about getting these things done. If every one of these groups, or if, 5 or 6 or 7 of these groups were doing their own versions, suddenly you have a lot of competition. So there's a goal to keep people coordinated.
You mentioned Paul Dans, who was kind of scapegoated leading up to the election, and they used him to kind of say, oh, he's not involved anymore, which was obviously a bit of a ruse. But let's talk to Kevin Roberts for a moment, who wrote the foreword and who is, I've listened to Kevin Roberts' speeches online where he thinks he's in a kind of private enclave and maybe forgot that it was being filmed. But the language about reshaping America is very explicit, and it's pretty scary. It kind of has Nazi undertones at times.
I think it's amazing how open they are about how radical their project is. So I think a lot of people, if they've heard of Kevin Roberts, it would have been in July of 2024, when he was on Steve Bannon's podcast and said that we're in the midst of a second American Revolution, which will be bloodless if the left allows it to be. Really a shocking statement.
Yeah.
You have Russell Vought saying that the 2024 election is going to be a turning point in American history like 1776 or 1860. It's really sweeping what they say they want to do. And, the fact that they did it out in public, I think, is remarkable. The fact that they put this document out on the internet 18 months before the election, where people could read it, says something about their ambitions, and says something about how confident they are in their ability to make them happen.
I noticed they've taken the document off of their website now, and you have to pay for it. So they clearly see a kind of revenue stream here, but there's a million versions of it out now. Let's just talk to some of the other cast of characters who have made it into the administration. I tried to make a list of them, and it was almost too long. Maybe we should start with Brendan Carr, for example. He was the pick for the Federal Communications Commission, and he wrote the chapter outlining a series of reforms to the FCC. A lot of the themes with these chapters is cost saving, but it actually is, again, a bit of a distraction, isn't it? It's not really about cost saving, in as much as Doge was never really about cost saving, but ideology.
Right. And, for Carr, I think there's a couple things that stand out. One is this idea that agencies like the FCC should not be independent. So since 1935, we've had a Supreme Court decision saying that although the heads are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, these places operate on their own. And that's how Congress established them. The law says that. But the folks behind Project 2025, including Brendan Carr, believe that that is unconstitutional. They want to get the Supreme Court to overrule that. So the president can use these agencies as tools of his policy without any insulation. And in the case of the FCC, we can see what that might look like because Brendan Carr is already basically operating that way now that he has been appointed chairman by Trump. So, we see him going after CBS, demanding transcripts for interview with Kamala Harris. We see him going after Comcast, threatening the broadcast license for MSNBC. He's looking at these ways to use regulatory power in ways that I think are fairly clearly contrary to the First Amendment. But they're going to try them and see how far they can get them. It's an attempt to stifle speech. He is also, although he complains about censorship from what he calls censorship from social media companies. It's interesting. The theory that he lays out and that some of the other people lay out is that the government should tell companies how to handle speech. Now, that to me seems pretty obviously a bigger problem. You may have hesitations about social media companies and the way they deal with speech, but if you have a hesitation about that, surely you don't want the government to be telling people how to do it. That's exactly what they want and what they talk about in here.
So let's talk about free speech, because, as you say, that is very much a theme. Elon Musk claimed to be a free speech absolutist, and yet is banning people left, right, and center, and taking very personally any criticism that comes his way. The Project 2025 version of free speech is basically the freedom to abuse minorities, as I see it.
Yeah, I think free speech is whatever is the speech that they want to use. So when they say that liberty is the liberty to do as we ought, they have the same view of free speech. It's very cynical. I don't think they meant it, but it is remarkable that Trump, despite his history of calling for censorship, of calling for making defamation laws looser, all of these things, was able to somehow position himself as the free speech president in the election.
And there are certain organizations that have capitulated. And
that's right.
You mentioned CBS, of course, 60 Minutes, their flagship news program, rolled over. It seemed surprisingly quickly. We saw that with the LA Times. We saw that with the Washington Post leading up to the election. And now we're starting to see it with some universities, not all, but some universities too, who have been accused of certain biases. What is your position on, because it's important that we don't spend this entire conversation talking about what's coming this way without anything going that way, right? So how do these types of organizations stand up to this? We're seeing it a little bit now with some of the universities, Harvard leading that charge of collectively standing up. But the media, there doesn't seem to be a collective media, really. In the press room, they could have done it with the AP and with Reuters when they were excluded. Really, that was the moment for the media to come together. But if the media is so polarized, how do you fight back against a regime that is trying to silence critique?
Right. I think this is a real problem. And I think the collective media exists only maybe in Trump's imagination.
Yeah.
The problem is it is so atomized, and you have a wide range of different ownership structures and management. If you look at something like CBS, which is owned by Paramount, or you look at ABC, which is owned by Disney and settled a lawsuit with Trump, they're looking at their bottom line for a lot of businesses that are not media. And I think it points to the fragility of corporate ownership. They may be making a rational decision, even if it's a politically foolish one or a cowardly one. ABC is not the most important thing in Disney's budget, and they're concerned that Trump could use the power of the government to retaliate against them. Of course, we saw Ron DeSantis try to do that in Florida, and we see Trump and people in Project 2025, promising that they will do that. So they're right to be fearful about it. It's heartening to finally see some universities pushing back and not rolling over. And we'll see how long that lasts. It still seems very early. But those seems like the first place where we've seen that. I think there are media owners who have been strong about that, and I think that's very good, but it really depends on the outlet.
It's almost as if, it is as if the bottom line is more important than the freedoms that we enjoy, and that capitalism has got to such a point in the US that people are, business leaders are choosing their shareholders over their entire future existence in a nation that is supposedly free.
I think there's a lot of very short-sighted attitude by these owners and by a lot of other people. I was so shocked watching Columbia University roll over so quickly to Trump. We have seen years of Trump. We know how Trump operates. He's never going to take that as enough. It's not going to stop him. It's only going to be the very beginning. And the fact that people still don't see that, I think, is a failure of imagination and a failure to learn from what's right in front of their eyes.
The one that saddened me the most was Tim Apple, who shall forever be known as Tim Apple and not Tim Cook. because, I've always seen him, and maybe I've just fallen for the Apple commercials too much, which are so kind of multicultural and celebrating diversity, and he's a gay man himself. And the fact that it seems that Apple capitulated pretty darn quickly, in addition to donating to the inauguration. I always thought he was one of the good guys. But again, this is proving the example that money, they're the richest company in the world, right? So they can actually afford to hold the line on this, can't they? And yet, pretty much straight away, jump straight in with that.
Well, and Apple's an interesting case too. It seems like they may have gotten carve-outs on some of these tariffs. So it's perhaps the case that he made a Faustian bargain and won it. It's too hard to tell so far, but even there, that points to how much, if that is true, it points to how corrupt and how cronyistic this administration is. They purport to be taking a hard line, but there's carve-outs for their friends. There's carve-outs for people who are willing to get on board. And of course, all of that breaks into the sanctions regime.
And you mentioned that there might have been some strategy here, and you mentioned the tariffs. It seemed that Trump didn't meet with any of these business leaders before announcing a 145% tariff on China. And then a week later, after he did have a meeting with Apple and Walmart and Target, that he came out and reversed that announcement. Literally that quickly. This is proof of how malleable Donald Trump is and how easy he is to manipulate, even just with people who are supposedly on the same side. But secondly, it has completely upset the markets and supply chains and everything that goes with that. Not to mention small businesses that are going to probably have to close just because of a decision that he made and then reversed a week later. That's how dangerous this laissez-faire attitude to random numbers is. So do you think, you mentioned it, but do you think that Apple were like, okay, this is going to cost us $1 million in a donation. It's going to cost us looking like the bad guys for about 3 weeks. But ultimately, as you say, they did manage to get him to change his mind on tariffs. Yeah,
there seems to be a thin stratum of people who are so powerful that Trump is willing to sort of bow to them. So, Ivy League universities are not quite in that tranche. Elon Musk seems to be one of those. Trump has given him free reign over the government. Apple and Tim Apple seems to be potentially in that stratus. We don't know yet. But there's some folks who are so wealthy that Trump seems to be intimidated by them as much as he loves wealth, as much as he talks about his own wealth. There are people that he knows are wealthier than him. And he seems to get a kick out of the idea that the world's richest man, hangs out in his office and is his sidekick.
So in the same way that he sees Apple and their revenue as seductive, maybe. So follow the money is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because, so much of this is much simpler than we often try to make it, right? He is a very simple man. Big Mac, Diet Coke, pretty ladies. There's not really much to him. And I actually see all of this presidenting that he's having to do as a distraction from what he'd rather be doing, which is just playing golf and eating takeout.
He seems to see it that way too. He talks about how the job is very hard.
Yeah.
And he's complaining, I could have had an easy life. I could have been doing X, Y, and Z. And I also think, what are we talking about? We're talking about tariffs. We're talking about immigration. These are two things that Trump has been talking about since the 80s. He's very passionate about them. And everything else, he only has a fleeting interest in it. There's retribution, but other than that, he isn't all that interested.
Let's just go back to the project and your book for just a moment. What in writing this book, why choose this moment? Because we could have done with your book 2 years ago, and I'm sure you would accept that, not as a criticism, but as an observation. And that, people, I think, have been slow to realize quite how organized this movement is. And it's part of the deception, the fact that Trump is so disorganized, and so that the front man is effectively a clown, a circus performer. But it's the people behind him. Kevin Roberts appears to lack a sense of humor completely, as far as I can see it. These people are deadly serious about this movement, and Trump is their Trojan horse.
To the first point, I would say, even if you don't offer that as a criticism, I would take it as one. I think it's right. I had looked at I looked at documents like this in the past, and so when I came across Project 2025, I treated it the same way. When I was interested in what they had to say about, for example, the military, I would read the chapter on the military. I'd read them independently. And it was only when I read it as a whole that I thought I started to grasp just how systemic an approach it was. And I thought that was something that I had missed, and I thought that was something that other people had missed, and I wanted to convey that. I think that's exactly right. They see Trump as a vessel. So, he is somebody who is willing to break through the government, and he's somebody who has the fealty of congressional Republicans. And so he can do a lot of things without congressional Republicans saying, hey, wait a second, that's our power. Hey, wait a second, you can't do that. But for them, all of these other, he's just the method. He's just the vessel. And they're perfectly happy for him to be distracted by other things while they put people in who they've trained and who will work towards the priorities that they want.
We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the specific policies that have changed in a kind of stealth-like way. I'm referring to things like civil rights and climate regulations and the like. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. There's a lot happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or hopeless when things are outside of our control. But Calm can help you restore your sense of balance amidst outside chaos. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone faces challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't about a cookie-cutter approach. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate the ups and downs of life, including meditation, sleep stories, sleep meditation, calming music, grounding exercises, and expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and much more. Calm puts the tools that you need in your pocket and helps you dedicate a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners to this show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/weekend. Go to calm.com/weekend for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/weekend. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Script, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. And we're back on The Weekend Show with David Graham. I'm Anthony Davis. Project 2025 encompasses so many facets of the Trump regime. We've talked to some of them, but there are others that tend to kind of happen in a bit of a vacuum. And for those people that are directly affected by it, obviously it's massive. So I want to talk to some of those. The loss of civil rights, gutting departments, for example, where that upheld citizens' civil rights. I mean, again, that's something, because it doesn't seem to, it's not as clear cut as taking away your social security, that the media tends not to kind of sit on it for very long, and that information doesn't get through to people. Which parts of the project that have affected Trump's policies kind of chimes with you the most? I mean, for me, things like disrupting programs to help victims of hate crime and sex trafficking and children who've suffered violence and refugees, these kind of federal grant programs, all halted by the Justice Department. I mean, that's straight out of the project, isn't it?
That's right. Obviously there's been a lot of attention to things like his orders on trans rights and his order purporting to declare that there's only male and female sexes. One of the things that I find most chilling is this kind of subversion of a lot of federal offices that have traditionally helped to uphold civil rights into another purpose. So, for example, they want to take the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, move it away from the sorts of discrimination cases that it has done in the past, whether those are on gender discrimination or on racial discrimination, and orient it around anti-Christian discrimination, or what they see as anti-Christian discrimination. They want to take the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, which, enforces voting rights laws, for example, and they want to use it to go after what they see as anti-white discrimination. So it's not just getting rid of the rights that exist, but it's in fact using these offices as weapons to persecute the people who are on the other side from them, and to fight what they see as wokeness with the power of the federal government.
It's chilling, though, isn't it? Because I often think that they look at the census and they see the number of people of color rising and the number of white people diminishing, and that's almost like that's their greatest fear, is that it will achieve parity and then kind of cross the Rubicon. Is that why there's a kind of rush to do so much of this stuff? Because their white supremacy is such that they want to kind of maintain this white male Christian nationalist version of America and not let it slip into the hands of the other.
And they think that's very close to happening. They say that there's a Marxist takeover going on, and it's very close to succeeding. When I look around, it doesn't feel like much of a Marxist takeover, but I think they believe this. They really think that the America they love is going away. It's being overcome by leftists. It's being overcome by, non-binary people and people of color. And they think that this is the moment to do it. They see this as an existential moment. And they believe already that the Constitution has been thrown out. Russell Vogt has said, we're living in a post-constitutional moment already. And once you accept that idea, it gives you much more leeway to act forcefully, to take away other people's rights, to tear up the laws as they exist, because you are in this crisis moment and you have to do anything you can to save the America that you love. That's the mindset they're in.
They've paused programs aimed at reducing school shootings, efforts to combat domestic terror, even an Emmett Till cold case initiative in the Southeast. I mean, again, it's getting into the specifics, but it's the collective of all of these that really is that kind of, I keep coming back to Nazis for some reason, and correct me if it's inappropriate, but there is maybe a fear to make these comparisons, but I feel it. And so, this is clearly what is happening. It is minority groups, whether religious or cultural, that they are wanting to effectively remove. And they're not just deporting people to their home countries, but by deporting people to an El Salvadorian concentration camp. How is that any different to Nazi Germany?
I think what you see is this obsession with power. You see an obsession with maintaining a culture as it stands. You see an obsession with industrial policy. These are the characteristics. You see obsession with security. These are the characteristics of nearly all of those early to mid 20th century authoritarian regimes. The Italian fascists, the Spanish fascists. So many of these people, you see the same concerns running through this, and it is often the same problem. You are worried that the country that you believe in is being taken away, and you must do anything you can to preserve it.
Let's talk about the vote, if we can, because the SAVE Act and even that executive order that Trump did a few weeks ago, which was basically the SAVE Act. I mean, how much of that is from Project 2025? Like the idea of suppressing the vote so that this movement will stay in power forever after.
They look less directly at voting laws specifically, but they do see ways to alter the system to do that. So the census is one place I think about. And we saw Trump try to do this in the first term. They really see the census as a useful place for power, in the same way that they see the Office of Management and Budget, this sort of dry, unsexy office, as a way to exert power. The census is the same way. They want to make sure there's a question on the census about citizenship. And that does two things. First of all, it may intimidate some people from filling out the census for fear that it will be used by the government to track them down if they're not a citizen. And indeed, we see Elon Musk and Doge gathering all this data, putting it all together in one place. So there's a real concern about data that's genuine. But then they want to take that data and they want to use it in the redistricting process. So currently, congressmen are allocated based on population. They want to be based on citizen population. That gives more power to the people who are already citizens in the country. It shifts power away from those people, and it entrenches Republicans for years to come with a sort of a sort of national gerrymander, if you will.
And they do genuinely feel, from a kind of eugenics and genetic perspective, that the white man is a superior race. And they've said this in a whole range of different ways. They never specific. I mean, even from Trump's, look at my African American friend over there. I mean, there are moments where you're like, what is this guy thinking?
I mean, you see a guy like Darren Beatty who, serves in the Trump administration, served in the first Trump administration, was fired for being a white supremacist and is now back. Saying that the government will only function once we have white men in charge of it. So sometimes some of these people are explicit.
They did say that recently, didn't they? I heard that. Wasn't it regarding the military, that it's really kind of, what we need is white men. And even firing women who have had very successful military careers, not to mention trying to remove trans people from the military altogether. I mean, it's not really setting an example for our children, is it?
Well, for them, this is exactly the example they want to set for their children, This is what they see as right, and they want to train people in it. It's that whole of society vision. But of course, there are many people who I don't believe want that for their children at all.
Just as a side note, I was reading about RFK Jr. wanting to do this kind of study of autism and ADHD and various things, and that he was going to kind of try and access people's health data in order to get this information. And again, to me, that just kind of screamed of the Stasi or any of these kind of militant secret police groups. I mean, is that baked into the Project 2025 as well? This idea that you really kind of get information on people and use that information, weaponize it against them.
Yeah, Kennedy has his own interests like autism, but the idea of collecting data like that for the federal government, I think, is very much a part of Project 2025. So whether that's, collecting data on education outcomes and family structure to try to back up this idea of a this conservative idea of the family, whether it's collecting data on abortion, this sort of surveillance data around abortion to discourage it and potentially criminalize it. You see all of these places where they want to gather this data in ways that are unprecedented, and they want to use it to further this. They also repeatedly talk about this idea of doing research where they lay out, there's a foreordained conclusion. So, for example, they want to do research on the harms of abortion to women. That sounds to me like you've already figured out what your outcome is, and all you have to do is find the data that you want to do backwards to find it. This is the way they seek to use data.
It's interesting that you mentioned that one specifically because, the numbers of women who are victims of rape who have not been able to access abortion has just gone through the roof. I think the figure I saw was like 160,000 just this year. I mean, these are real human people with emotions and lives and feelings, all the things that Trump does not have the capacity to have empathy for and connect with. The word that I always come back to, apart from Nazism, is cruelty. The cruelty with so many of these things. There is a sadistic joy, it seems. And even when Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, posted a video of all of the pictures of these immigrants outside of the White House, these posters paid for by the taxpayer, I have no doubt, there was a joy in her posting look at the White House. I think it was good morning from the White House. I mean, this is a very nasty and completely cruel epidemic that is flowing not just through the administration, but a good number of the supporters too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even when we talk about Russell Vought saying he wants to traumatize people, it's such a dark vision. It's very scary to hear somebody say that openly.
I've been watching the new series of Andor. I don't know if you're a Star Wars fan.
I haven't seen it yet.
The similarities, and I'm sure it's intentional, but the similarities of the Rebel Alliance, which is slowly forming against this empire, these kind of Imperials, and the use of language and the scripting, which I think one of the writers of House of Cards is writing this, and so consequently there is undoubtedly a political message. But I mean, I've clearly become an American using Star Wars as reference for modern day politics. But it's very interesting when you see it on other people, when you see it in space, for example. You can look at it and draw the comparisons, and it is incredibly serious. And I found myself feeling really sad watching this because I was like, wow, this is what is happening on this planet. We are always in danger of talking about it as if it's something that's way off in the future, aren't we? But this is a shared reality for so many people.
That's right. I have been trying to remind myself to not talk about it as though it's in the future, and to not talk about it in purely policy terms, because this is something that is happening to people every day, and it is changing their lives every day. It is not simply a 900-page document on the internet. It is life in America, and it's life in America in the future, but it's life in America right now.
So let's talk about pushback, because I think it would be remiss of us not to offer some guidance on how to not fall foul of Darth Vader and this imperial regime, right? So where is your head when it comes to this? The resistance.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. And I think one lesson to take from Project 2025 and also from the anti-abortion movement is that you cannot simply be reactive and you cannot think in the short term. So they've been working on these issues for decades in some cases. They've been thinking about how to do them. They have a careful plan. And often I see people resisting Trump working on a very short time scale. So, I think they need to be looking at what's in Project 2025 so they're ready for the next thing and not taken by surprise by that in the way that they seem to be. And, I wrote the book in parts so that they can be ahead of it. They're not so surprised. And I think then, there needs to be a plan for how to rebuild American society in another way. If we can't go back to the way things were, if we're not going to put things back to the New Deal as it was, or we're not going to put things back to the Great Society as it was, we need to figure out what the vision of America we want is, and we need to think about how we're going to do that. Whatever other critiques I have of Project 2025, they have laid out what they want and they've laid out how they want to do it. And I think the left hasn't managed to do that yet.
There is a kind of naive desire that things will just ping back.
Right.
After the midterms. Oh, it'll ping back.
Right. And I think that's understandable. That's the way a lot of things have worked in American politics. It is a back and forth like that. You get a new Congress, you get a new president, and things go back to roughly the way they were. And I think it's hard for people to accept that that's not the situation we're in now. But I think the sooner people appreciate that, the better off they'll be.
That is a kind of probably the most chilling point of this conversation for people who don't have the time to be fully engaged in politics, and that is most people, that this is a definitive change of direction for America, not least aligning with Russia over the war in Ukraine and dropping these allegiances, NATO, for example, but certainly Europe. I mean, that is, if you need the kind of most simplistic example of how the US is changing going forward and will remain changed, it's that, isn't it?
I think that's right. The relationships, whether they're relationships inside the United States, communities, the departments we have, or the relationships with foreign countries, these things are going to not come back quickly. Once you've broken that trust, it takes a long time to rebuild. And I think Trump underestimates how fragile those are. But allies are not going to trust us for a long time, and they're going to have good reason to distrust us.
China has been playing Trump as much as Putin has been playing Trump.
Yes.
Right? He thinks that he's holds all the cards, to coin a phrase, but in reality is that, I mean, Xi Jinping basically denied that they'd even had a conversation about tariffs.
Right. I mean, I think this is a place where Trump is not on a page with Project 2025, which looks at China as such an existential threat. And Trump is willing to speak that language, but he's not willing to act seriously about it. The tariffs are done so haphazardly. He doesn't seem to appreciate, the extent to which Chinese society can withstand a great shock. And he doesn't seem to appreciate how important it is to have allies on board if you're going to do something like confront another major superpower. Instead, he's alienating allies left and right. And I think that will be to his detriment. And ours.
Indeed. So women seem to be bearing the brunt of a lot of Project 2025, not to mention immigrants, minorities, and people from the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, that's kind of where it starts for them. We haven't mentioned the Democrats, have we?
Not much.
Should the Democrats be writing Project 2028? I mean, is it as simple as that? Like, was there not a document that people could access the last time around? Because, Democrats talk about messaging and all of that stuff, but in reality, the Republicans have been far more organized in recent years. And Trump had to win this election for multiple reasons, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. And we see these divisions among Democrats, with different wings. And something that they've managed to do on the right is to coalesce around a leader and to sort of create a comprehensive program. And there's a lot to criticize in that program, but you see Democrats still feuding over what the election meant and not really looking forward. I think Democrats do need to have some sort of plan if they're going to respond. You can't simply wake up each morning, see what outrage Trump has committed, and respond to that one. You need to be ready for the next one. You need to be ready for the one that comes 6 months from now.
Do people know what the alternative is? I mean, do you think there is enough clarity? Because, Trump never went away as leader of the MAGA Republicans, did he? I mean, he obviously claimed that he'd won the 2020 election, but he continued to do rallies. He continued to try and write the media narrative. When Kamala Harris lost the election, she literally went to ground. Oh, she went to Hawaii, as far as I'm aware. But I mean, she kind of went missing. And for those of us who were great supporters of her and felt that she was a good candidate, we could really do with seeing her step up right now, even though we're not in an election cycle. Should we be breaking protocol and having a kind of, de facto, even temporary leader?
I mean, this is what we see about Democrats as their strength and their weakness. Their strength is that it's a huge coalition with a lot of different interests, a lot of different people standing up for different things. And the weakness is it's very hard for any one person to unify them. And we're seeing that right now. I mean, with Harris off the scene, I don't know who I could name as the leader of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders has a claim on it, but there's a lot of people who disagree with him. AOC is very young. Chuck Schumer seems to be alienating many Democrats. It's just not clear who the leader is. But I do think that there's a broad set of principles that the left agrees on that creates a foundation, and that is rights for women, that is economic fairness, that is the power of democracy. So you can see where you could build a base, but you have to start building.
Finally, let's talk about Donald Trump's funeral. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. How does this movement survive after, he's 78 years of age now, and he doesn't look particularly well. He looked more dead than the Pope at the funeral, actually, last week, from some of the images that I saw. What happens to the MAGA Republicans? What happens to Project 2025 when you take Donald Trump away? Now, there's a good chance he'll live another 20 years, and, this conversation is null and void. But just assuming that it doesn't work out like that, is this movement solidified outside of that Trump base? Can J.D. Vance carry this movement? Is there enough backup and preparation for continuing this over generations without the big man?
I think there is a real question on the political will on that end. I think Trump is very unusual. I think he does have a charisma that just no other Republican has. You can look at J.D. Vance, and you can see that he doesn't have the same kind of magnetism that Trump does, even if you dislike Trump. I mean, he just has a different sort of presence. I think that's going to be a problem for Republicans. I think it's also going to be a problem for Republicans that many of these policies poll very poorly. They have been unpopular in the past. I don't see that they're going to change a lot going forward. Certainly, abortion has only gotten more popular since Dobbs. So things are moving in the wrong way for them. That's one reason why I think Project 2025 is so important, is that they are laying a groundwork so that they have many levers of power. So they're prepared for when Trump is gone. They want to move things as far as they can, so they're prepared for that, and they change the stakes, and they want to have people in place who can keep these government departments moving in the direction they want. So that even if the people turn against them, and even if they lose Trump, and even if J.D. Vance or Josh Hawley or whomever can't quite pull it, they're still going to have changed America, and they're going to move their priorities forward.
But the mindset of people can't change, and 90-odd million people didn't vote in this last election, and Kamala Harris was only 1.5 percentage points behind Donald Trump, so his mandate is propaganda, really. So arguably what we're saying, I'm trying to be a little optimistic here, is that if the Democrats or some other party can harness the general feeling from the country as a whole, which when polled nationally is far more liberal than Trump would have you believe, that actually, Trump very much could be wiped out if the other side organizes well enough.
I think that's right. And I mean, that's why I talk about the importance of looking forward, because I do think that there is a potential coalition for it. It's just a coalition that's going to need to be building their vision on what they inherit. And that's going to be different from what Trump inherited on January 20th, 2025, excuse me.
Well, well done with the book. It's an essential document at this moment in American political history, and I wish you every success with it. And I'm very grateful for you joining us today, David A. Graham.
It's been my pleasure.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News, or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.